We continue with the chapter data handling. Data means raw facts collected from different sources. Usually the data collected will be in an unorganized form. So what we have to do? We have to organize the data systematically, and after that we can draw conclusions from the given data. So today's topic is organizing data. How we can organize the data. Now look at this example. The favorite subject of 22 students are given. Favorite subject of 22 students: art, mathematics, science, English. So their favorite subjects are given. So when you look at the data, you can see that it is an unorganized data. So when we look at this data, you won't understand which is the most liked subject and which one is the least liked. You won't understand. So if you arrange the data properly, that means if you organize the data properly, you can make conclusions. So here we are going to organize the data using tally marks. Using tally marks, we can organize the data. So we have to represent the data in a table. Now we are going to draw the table. The table consists of 3 columns. Then the first column we can write subject. Now the second column tally marks. And the third column number of students. So we have to make a table. Now we have 3 columns. The first column we have to write down the subject, second column tally marks, and third column number of students. Then subject, art, then mathematics, science, and English. Now we have to put the tally marks. Now look at that. First subject is art. We can put a vertical stroke. This vertical stroke is known as the tally mark, vertical stroke. Then next mathematics, science, English, then again mathematics, art, science, English, mathematics, English, art, again art, then science, again science, mathematics, art. So the fifth one you have to close it. Then again English, again art, science, mathematics, then science, art. Now you have to count the total number of tally marks. Then 5 plus 2, 7, mathematics 5, science 6, then English 4. Now you can add it, the total you have to get as 22 total. Then total number of students 7 plus 5 12, 12 plus 6, 18, 18 plus 4, 22. So we got 22. Now look at that, the number of tally marks before each subject gives the number of students who like that particular subject. The total number of tally marks before each subject gives the number of students like that subject. And this total number of students, that means it is the frequency of that subject. Frequency. So frequency means how many times a particular entry occurs. So art occurs, the frequency of the subject art is 7. That means the subject art occurs 7 times. Then mathematics 5, then science 6 and English is 4. So the frequency, number of students, instead of number of students we can write it as frequency. Frequency means how many times a particular entry occurs or a particular observation occurs. That is known as the frequency. And the table made is known as a frequency distribution table. The name of the table is frequency distribution table. Frequency distribution table. Frequency distribution table. Therefore, number of students, instead of number of students, you can write it as a frequency. Frequency. Therefore, frequency means the number of times a particular entry occurs. The number of times a particular entry occurs, that is known as the frequency. And the given distribution, we can call it as a frequency distribution. And the table made is known as frequency distribution table. Frequency distribution table. Then suppose if the number of observations is large, so it is very difficult to make this a frequency distribution table. So we have to enter each observation. So the table would be too long. Then in that case, how we can organize the data? Now look at this example. The weights in kilogram of 30 employees of a company are given below. The weights in kilogram of 30 employees of a company are given below. So the weights are given below. So we have to, this is an unorganized data. We have to organize the data. Now if you write down the observations one by one, what we can say that the table would be too long. So it will be very difficult. So what we have to do is, we have to make groups. We have to make groups. We have to make groups. That means the data should be divided into different groups. The data should be divided into different groups. Now we can look into how we can make it into different groups. So for that purpose, first of all you find out the lowest observation. So this each entry we can call it as the observation. So find out the lowest observation or the lowest value. So which is the lowest value? Lowest value, the lowest value is a 42. So the lowest value is 42. Then find out the highest value. Highest value or the highest observation you can find out. So which is the highest observation? So here you can see that 77 is the highest value. So the highest observation is 77. So the lowest observation is 42 and the highest observation or the highest value is 77. Now we have to divide these observations into different groups so that all the observations are included in that groups. Now the lowest value is 42. So we can start from 40 onwards. So we can write it as one group as 40 to 50. One group. Okay. From 40 to 50. One group. Then second group we can take as 50 to 60. Then third group 60 to 70. Then fourth group 70 to 80. Now the lowest value and as well as the highest value is included in that groups, and as well as all other observations are also included in the group. So we have to divide the data into different groups. For that purpose, first of all find out the lowest value and find out the highest value, and you can make the groups. Then 40 to 50, 50 to 60, 60 to 70, 70 to 80. Now we have the groups. Now the next column is a tally marks. And the last column will be frequency. That means how many times each entry occurs. Therefore, that will give the frequency. Now we have to enter the data. Now first one is 42. So where will this 42 will come? In the group 40 to 50. So 42. Then 65. 65 will come in the group 60 to 70. 65. Then 51. 51 will come in the group 50 to 60. 51. Then 77. 77 will be in 70 to 80 group. Then 60. So where will you mark this 60? We have to mark 60. Where will you mark 60? Now 40 to 50 means you have to consider all the observations below 50. 50 is not included in this group. But 50 to 60 means all the observations below 60. You have to consider all the observations below 60. Then 60 to 70 means all the observations below 70. So this 60 will belongs to which group? 60 will belongs to the group 60 to 70. 60 will belongs to the group 60 to 70. It is not in 50 to 60. So remember, 60 you have to enter in the group 60 to 70. So the meaning is that you have to consider all the observations below 70, and 60 is from 60 to below 70 you have to consider. Therefore 60 will come in the group 60 to 70. Then put a vertical stroke. Next one is 68. 68 will be in the 60 to 70 group. Then 50. So where will you mark this 50? 50 will belongs to which group? 50. Now look at that. 40 to 50 means you have to consider all the observations below 50. 50 is not included. So 50 to 60 means you have to consider all the observations below 60. So 50 will come in the group 50 to 60. So you can put a vertical stroke. Then 46. Then 62. 53. 62, 52, 54, 70. So where will you mark this 70? 70 will belong to which group? 70 will belongs to the group 70 to 80. 70 will belongs to the group 70 to 80. So we have to put a vertical stroke. Then 63, 67, 56, 62, 60. 60 will belong to the group 60 to 70. 55, 58, 59, then again 58, 73, 52, 68, 71, 69, 75, 75. Now we can find out the total number of tally marks. 2, then 5 plus 5, 10 plus 1, 11, again 11, then 6. Then we have how many observations are given? 30. So when you add it, you have to get it as a 30. Total So we made the table, we organized the data, we divided the data into different groups and we made the table. And the table consists of 3 columns. One is known as a groups, second one tally marks and the third one frequency. Now look at the groups. Now the groups we can call it as the class intervals. The groups are known as class intervals. Class intervals. Groups are known as class intervals. So instead of writing groups, we can write it as class intervals. Groups we can write as class intervals. Class intervals. So these groups are known as class intervals. Now how many class intervals are there? Here we can see that 4 class intervals. 4 class intervals. So the groups are known as class intervals. So the groups here are 40 to 50, 50 to 60, 60 to 70 and 70 to 80. And these groups we can call it as class intervals. So instead of writing groups, now onwards we will write it as class intervals. Then look at the class interval 40 to 50. Look at the class interval 40 to 50. Then this 40 is known as lower limit of the class interval or lower class limit. Lower limit of the class interval or lower class limit, and 50 is known as upper class limit. Upper class limit. Now look at the class interval 40 to 50. 40 is known as lower class limit and 50 is known as upper class limit. Then when we come to the class interval 50 to 60, 50 is known as the lower class limit and 60 is known as the upper class limit. Then 60 to 70, 60 is the lower class limit and 70 is the upper class limit. When you consider 70 to 80, 70 is the lower class limit and 80 is the upper class limit. Then again, the difference between the lower class limit, that means the difference between the upper class limit and the lower class limit, the difference between the upper class limit and lower class limit. Upper class limit and lower class limit is known as, the difference between the upper class limit and the lower class limit is known as the size of the class interval. Size of the class interval. Size of the class interval, or we can say that the width of the class interval, the size or the width of the class interval. The difference between the upper class limit and the lower class limit is known as the width or size of the class interval. Now here what is the difference? 50 minus 40. So 50 minus 40, 50 minus 40 equal to 10. Therefore here look at that, when you take each class interval, 60 minus 50, 60 minus 50, what is the difference? 10. Then similarly 70 minus 60, the difference is 10. Then again 80 minus 70, the difference is 10. So this is known as the, here you can see that the size is equal. So the size of the class intervals is equal. Therefore we can say that when you make the groups, so the width or size should remain the same. So when you select the group, so you cannot select as 40 to 50 and the next one is 50 to 55, not possible. So the size should remain the same for all the class intervals. So the size means or the width means the difference between the upper class limit and the lower class limit, and here the size of the class interval is, what is the size of the class interval? The size of the class interval is 10. So here we can divide the data into different groups, and the groups are known as class intervals. So when you consider a class interval, for example 40 to 50, 40 is known as the lower class limit and 50 is known as the upper class limit, and the difference between the upper class limit and the lower class limit is known as the size or with the width of the class interval. So in order to make the groups, you can decide. So what will be the size? You can decide. You can take it as 10, you can take it as 5, you can take it as 2. So depending upon the data, you can select the size of the given class interval. You can select the size of the class intervals. Now next question, construct a frequency distribution table, and the frequency table made is known as the grouped frequency distribution table. The name of the frequency table is grouped frequency distribution table. So we can call it as grouped frequency distribution table. Grouped frequency distribution table. Grouped frequency distribution table. Grouped frequency distribution table, and it is known as, and the distribution we can call it as a grouped frequency distribution, and the table we can call it as grouped frequency distribution table. Now the question, construct a frequency distribution table for the data on weights in kilogram of 20 students of a class using intervals. Class intervals are given here. So 30 to 35, 35 to 40 and so on. Sometimes in the question it is given. So you have to start from 30 to 35. You have to make the class intervals in this way, 30 to 35, 35 to 40, like that. Now look at that, out of these observations. So each entry we can call it as the observation, and out of these observations we can see that the smallest one is 31 and the highest value is which is the highest one? The highest value is 65. So 65. So you have to start from 30 onwards. So the lowest value is 31. So we can start from 30 onwards. The class intervals are already given here. So we can write 30 to 35. So the first column we can write it as a class intervals, and the second column is known as a tally marks, and the third column we can say, what is the third column? That is a frequency. The third column is a frequency. Now the first class interval 30 to 35, then 35 to 40, 40 to 45. So can you say what is the size of the class interval? What is the size? 30 is known as the lower class limit and 35 is known as the upper class limit. So the difference between the upper class limit and the lower class limit, that is 35 minus 30, which is equal to 5. Therefore the size of the class interval, the size is equal to, what is the size? The size of the class interval is 5. So you can see that everywhere the size of the class interval is 5. So 40 to 45, next one is 45 to 50, then 50 to 55, 55 to 60 and 60 to 65. So the class intervals. Okay, so if the class size is less, then the class intervals, the number of class intervals will be large. Then we can put the tally marks. The first one is 40. So where will you mark 40? Where will you mark this 40? 40 will come in the class interval 40 to 45. So what is meant by 40 to 45? You have to consider all the observations below 45. You have to consider. 45 is not included in that group. 45 will come to the next group. Okay. Therefore, when you consider all the observations below 45, 40 is included in the class interval 40 to 45. So 40 to 45, you have to can put a vertical stroke. Then 38, 33, 48, 48 will come in the group 45 to 50. Then 60, where will you mark 60? 60 means you have to consider which group you have to consider, 55 to 60 or 60 to 65. So 55 to 60 means all the observations below 60, 60 won't come in that group. So 60 to 65, so you have to mark 60 in the group 60 to 65. Then 53, 31, 46, 34, 36, 49, 41, 55. So where we have to mark 55? So in the group 55 to 60, 55, then 49, 65. So where you can mark 65? So if you want to mark 65, now look at that. So here if you consider this group, we can see that 65, we cannot include 65 in that group. Here we have to consider all the observations below 65. So we have to make one more group. So the next group is 65 to 70. So then only we can include the observation 65. So we have one more group 65 to 70. Then 42, 44, 47, 38, 39. Now we can count the total number of tally marks against each class interval. 3, then 4, 4, 5, 1, 1, 1, 1. So we can add it, we can find out the total. 2, 3, 4, 5 plus 4, 9, 9 plus 4, 13, 13 plus 4, 17 plus 3, 20. So the total is equal to 20. Total is equal to 20. So in this way we can make the table, and this frequency distribution is known as grouped frequency distribution, because the data, we divided the data into different groups, and each group we can call it as the class interval. So we can call the first column is under the heading class intervals, and the second one tally marks, and the last one frequency, means how many times a particular entry occurs. So the number of times a particular entry occurs gives the frequency. So frequency of the class interval 30 to 35 is what is the frequency? 3. Then 30 is known as the lower class limit and 35 is known as the upper class limit. And what is the size of the class intervals? Size of the class intervals is the upper class limit minus lower class limit, and you can see that the size of the class interval is 5. So once you selected the size, so for each class interval the size should remain the same. The same size you have to take. That's all for today's class. Thank you.